Here, Stolen Valor Medicine. I'm Sean Griffiths. We're going to talk today about leading a resuscitation. The last video we talked about resuscitation roles and how to structure. You have all this baseline knowledge. How do we put a scaffolding to it and to actually put our people in the room in the right places to do the right jobs? And so now we're going to talk about how to actually lead that resus. This is not certainly like a front to back end all be all, but this is things that I've noticed are major good things to do and then how to fix major bad mistakes. Okay. This is just sort of like things that I see people miss frequently and things that I see people who are great do frequently. So I'm not a total, encyclopedia, but I think a really good place to start. I think about this quote all the time. Good judgment is the result of experience, and experience is the result of bad judgment. Okay, said by this guy, Mark Twain. May have heard of him. So the reality of it is, you're gonna make mistakes, and the making of those mistakes is what builds you up and makes you better for the future. Okay, here's a skill development map that I came up with for this talk about basically your progress as a resuscitation team lead. You're going to be not good, then you're going to be sort of whatever, and then you're going to be good. This is how it goes. Okay, there's really no secret. There's no technique. There's no crazy data trail to follow or anything like that. Some of us are going to start off in different places than others. Some of us have natural tendencies that we're going to be better resuscitation team leads. Some of us are going to be more bad than others at the beginning, and we're going to progress at different stages through those experiences. But eventually, everyone starts off not as good as they're going to be. Then they start off a little, then they go a little bit better, and then they get to be good. Um, Everybody goes through that process. Okay, some of us just different times. Um, Depending on what your personality is like, what your ego is like, your interpersonal communication skills, your peers and mentors, what those are like, will help determine how fast you sort of go through these stages or not. Like anything else, resuscitation is a skill, it's a muscle that needs to be worked over before it can hypertrophy and improve. I think today we'll talk about the areas that I think are most vital for people to be good at the beginning, and then the smaller things they can improve at over time. If you're not like a resuscitation team lead or you're not the most senior person at your place, like don't worry, like these lessons are essentially universal to all aspects of medicine, certainly in life as well. They're basically the rules are universal. So some of them are actual specific tasks, and other ones are like more philosophical things to consider as you go through. Okay. This is one person's opinion. It's just me. All right. So this is what I think. Here's what we'll talk about some baseline requirements for resuscitation leaders. Maybe we should change that to like life leaders. How to do good and how to fix bad. This is a quite simple one. There are no CPGs involved. There are no journal clubs involved in this one. Rule number one, don't suck. So baseline requirements. So knowledge, will to lead, humility, and acceptance of responsibility. If you don't have those four things, or you don't do those four things, then you should not be running anything, or you need to get them quickly, because those are just the baseline. Okay, we can't get into how to fix bad and how to be good until you meet those minimum things. Okay, you're not getting in the back of an ambulance unless you're a paramedic. You're not getting into you're not going on combat deployment unless you've been to basic training. So you have to meet these sort of minimum requirements, or min force as the military would call them. If you don't have these things, then you should not be leading anybody, and you should get in the line and follow until you can learn some of these. We'll go through them one by one. So when you're like called upon to lead a resuscitation, that is not the time to be looking up the dose of TXA. That is not the time to be learning what your sort of go-to baseline ventilator starting settings are. That is not the time to figure out how to structure resuscitation via ACLS. Okay, those things like need to already have been figured out. Okay, you need to know the knowledge of your craft inside and out before you ever sort of step into the foot of a bed and start leading a resuscitation. That is like minimum requirement. Okay, so you can't go to your boss and say, well, I show up every day on time and I don't leave early and I do all my work on time. Well, yeah, those are like the minimum of your job. You're certainly not going above and beyond. So the minimum of a resuscitation team lead should be that they know how it's supposed to go. and they know the right and wrong answers to some of the book questions. If you don't know those, you will be immediately exposed. So don't step in front of a crowd until you have mastered at least the book knowledge, because you're not going to have any confidence in your ability to lead if you don't even know like the doses of the meds or how these resuscitation endpoints of blood pressure or whatever. Okay, so minimum thing you need to know, knowledge. You have to have a will to lead. Okay, so like we've all done things we don't want to do, but you're not good at any of those things. If you want to get good at something, and it's certainly something that's important, right? Like saving people's lives, you have to have the will to be good at it. Okay. Some of us self-select out of those leadership roles because we don't really care about that kind of thing. Well, I didn't really want to be a, admin person, so I didn't choose to be the deputy chief of whatever. That's fine. But if you're a physician, certainly, or you're a paramedic, like you're going to be leading resuscitations. You have to have the will to lead. Okay. Um, at some point in the near future, like you could find yourself looking around the room and saying, "Oh, yikes! Like I'm the most senior person," and so you have to accept that will needs to be there. You're not going to get good at this unless you have the will to be better. Okay. Uh, humility. Humility is mandatory when you're a team lead because it's going to happen to you. You will be humbled. Okay. And so accepting that you're going to be humbled is an easier path to eventual actual humility. Okay. So Dan Dworkis from the Emergency Mind has a good phrase that says something like, no one person is smarter than the room, meaning you may be in charge, but you're not smarter than every single person. You can't possibly know as much in your single brain as they cumulatively know in all the brains in the room. And so just like remember that. Um, remember that pride comes before the fall. And so before you get too excited about you being the leader, just recognize like you're gonna make some mistakes, and it's a lot easier to tolerate mistakes um, when you are humble than if you really sell yourself as this grandiose leader. And then this kind of goes along with will to lead, but it's the acceptance of responsibility. Okay, so like a leader needs to understand before they start leading that whatever endeavor I'm about to undertake is my job and I'm responsible for that outcome, good, bad, or whatever. And that my performance could be good, but if the outcome is poor and it's because of poor team performance, and that is ultimately something I'm responsible with. Okay. Saying something like, "It's not my fault," that feels good exactly one time. Okay, it's not gonna last, and it's just gonna lead to feelings of resentment and guilt over time. And so the idea that you're responsible for everything that happens to your patient is a very heavy burden. But once you do accept that, the job becomes much easier because you just realize, like, okay, I have to be good every day, every time, and that's now the standard versus trying to pretend and pick when you can and can't be good. So acceptance of responsibility. So those are the minimums. Okay, acceptance of responsibility, humility, willingness to lead, and knowledge or preparation. Once you have those things, you are now potentially ready to lead. But until you have them, honestly, you probably shouldn't be leading, and that's fine. We're not all ready to lead like on day one. Okay. All right. Now that you've met the minimums, how to do good. Okay, like I don't want to just do it. I want to do good. All right, sweet. So you need to establish dominance. Just kidding. So how to do good, establish dominance means do a pre-brief. Okay, you're not really establishing dominance. You're setting up the room. Live in the future. Keep it moving. Say my name and phone a friend / check with mom. Okay, so we'll check with all these and tell you what they're about. Uh, look at me. I'm the captain now. So this is your pre-brief. All right. Pre-brief establishes dominance, as we said. Not really, but like sort of. Okay. So if you have the ability to pre-brief your team before a sick person comes in, that is just so valuable. One, I'd say and joke that it establishes dominance, but what it really is doing is that it is identifying you as the team lead. Okay. There may be a bunch of people in there that don't know you. This may be a tactical swarm situation where RT's coming, anesthesia's coming, surgery's coming, and you don't work with these people every day, so they have no idea who you are. They think you're the team lead because you're like sort of hovering at the foot, but they may not know you. And so a pre-brief says, hey, everybody, I'm in charge. If you have a question, bring it to me. And also, as the team lead, I'm going to set us up for success as much as possible. Okay. Gives them situational awareness of what's coming in. I have a 38-year-old female coming in, motor vehicle versus pedestrian. These are the latest vitals. These are the three things I want to do when the person gets there. Okay. The pre-brief also does an interesting thing if you work at a place like I work, where there's like other people of similar or even higher levels than you who may not be the resuscitation team lead. And it gives you a chance to introduce yourself to them. Okay. Those people are risks to challenge your leadership. Okay. And not in like a competitive way, but it's interesting what happens when leadership vacuums arise during a dynamic situation. Someone's probably going to fill that vacuum. And so when you're doing a pre-brief, you should use that time to introduce yourself to other people in the room. So the good example is one of the places where I work, emergency medicine residents are the resuscitation team leads, but there's a trauma surgeon in the room. Trauma is a surgical problem as much as emergency medicine physicians, don't want to admit that. And so this pre-brief gives our emergency medicine residents time to introduce themselves to the trauma surgeon, talk to the trauma surgeon, and maybe even hit them with a, hey, like, if something's going down that you don't like, do you mind just telling me about it instead of yelling about it in the room, and that would basically challenge the leadership dynamic in the room. And so we have all the information going through one person. 99% of people are going to go, yeah, dude, got it. We want to keep communication clear. I know that you know that the trauma surgeon's in charge of the trauma ultimately, but you're the resuscitation team lead, so I will filter things through you. So you're not competing with those other people of, same or higher levels than you in the room, but, life's a competition, so you sort of are. So introduce yourself, brief your team. Live in the future. Okay. Um, Good leaders live ahead of the future, live ahead of the resuscitation, excuse me, by a minimum of several moves or several minutes. You're not going to be able to see like every step of the path to the patient's ultimate disposition. You're not going to see every step in the future. Things will happen that you can't see, but you should be living 5 minutes in the future for sure. You should be giving orders in real time. You should be giving orders for the future, and you should be already foreseeing problems and deconflicting those problems before they arise. You have massive hemorrhage, you have a person who is chewing through blood products, okay? You should not like be calling for the, massive infusion protocol or the mass cal protocol or the whatever your hospital does for massive blood products when you've used your last unit, like you should be doing massive transfusion protocol, when you recognize this person, maybe after unit one, you recognize, hey, they're gonna need a lot. Then you do it. So if you're not living in the future, you're gonna miss that. You're so worried about getting that first unit in that you're not even tracking that in 3 minutes you're gonna have a major problem unless you deconflict that. Okay. Um, Living in the future also exists to like what you're gonna say to the people in the room. And so some people are going to be working at different speeds. Okay, some people their job for the trauma may be done in the first 2 minutes. Okay, and they may start to do things that you don't necessarily want them to do. They start to get a mind of their own. They start to get a little squirrely. They start to say, well, I'm just going to do this because nobody's like telling me what to do. When it comes to thinking about the future, you also speak to the future. So you tell the room, hey, look, everybody, I know right now we're setting up blood pressure, we're getting that IV access. In the next move immediately after that, we're going to roll the patient, look at their spine, and get a chest x-ray. That prevents people from like just willy-nilly doing something that maybe you don't want them to do. And it lets them prepare for the future and also lets them know that like you're not just winging it. Like you have a plan. And so again, just like a pre-brief gives you legitimacy, having a plan is much more. People want to follow that person instead of just someone saying, "Well, I don't know, we're just winging it." Okay, so live in the future. Keep it moving. Um, Keep it moving is something I learned a long time ago, very early, watching some really bad resuscitations. Keep it moving is the concept that like the resuscitation has its own life force, and the best speed of that life should be continuous. If you are working in fits and starts as a resuscitation team, it becomes very choppy and it starts to confuse team members about what they should or shouldn't be doing. They basically start watching other people flounder and they don't do their own jobs. The stagnation that happens secondary to that working in fits and starts can breed dissent within the room. And then suddenly there's a lot of time for other opinions to pop up about what we should or shouldn't be doing. Um, it's good to have a resuscitation culture where people can feel like they can discuss different treatment options, but in reality, When it comes to trauma, at least, most of the time the decisions are relatively clear. And so you can discourage or you can reduce dissent, I should say, by keeping the resuscitation moving and keeping it continuous. Sometimes there will be periods of like dead air where you're sort of like waiting on something to happen. That's fine. You don't need to fill the entirety of the time in the trauma bay with you talking. That's insanity. But occasionally, and you'll pick and choose your spots for this, if you feel there is some stagnation, like, hey, we're waiting on the person to get this measurement or this thing, that is not a bad time to fill the room with a recap, actually. I'm going to say, hey, everybody, this is what we have done. We've done this, this, and this. We have found this and this. Our next step after we, finally secure the IV that, the medic on the left is working on, which is taking forever, and that's why we're feeling stagnation. We're going to roll the patient in and get a chest x-ray. So a recap of what you've done, what you're going to do next, reminds people, hey, don't walk away. Don't start doing something crazy. Don't do something I haven't told you to do. Just wait. We know where we're going and we have a road, but keep it moving. Try not to let it stagnate. If you are stagnating on one part in the primary survey or whatever, and somebody's working on the tourniquet on the left leg or whatever, don't let your other people focus on that. They can move through A, R, whatever. They can move through the other parts of the primary survey. Don't let them sit on one thing. Okay, say my name. Call people by their name. The name someone is no one. When you say the word someone, what you're basically giving everyone is a pass. Potentially no one's going to do that. Probably nobody is going to do that thing. I would rather you address someone as RT, anesthesia, medic on the right, than just say someone. Those are rude. Like, frankly, you shouldn't do that. You should really just attempt to learn people's names. And as somebody who really sucks at names, that's very intimidating for me to call someone by their name because I'm like not always sure what it is. But dude, using someone's name is just 1,000 times more effective than saying someone. Someone makes you sound anxious. Someone makes you sound worried. Someone makes it seem like you don't even know what's happening. Oh my God, can someone, anyone help me? That's not the vibe we're trying to put out in the room. We're trying to put a continuous resuscitation, a calm resuscitation, and a confident resuscitationist, right? You start saying someone, anyone, help, please. Suddenly, the other people in the room, they're like, I don't know about this leader. So I direct the exact person that you want to do the thing, and you'll find it happens much faster. I've seen trauma services or other places that actually have like name tags on their coveralls and stuff that says, anesthesia, Jamie, surgery, Jim, or whatever. And so those are actually, I think, really good idea. A friend, phone a friend or check in with mom. Okay, so some of these will be specific to potentially where I work, but when you're facing forks in the road or large interventions, like maybe we need to intubate this person, maybe we need to not. That's like a good time to potentially check in with other members of the team who are super important, right? If you have a trauma and you have a trauma surgeon in the room and you're thinking about intubating somebody, the trauma surgeon is going to own that person. Okay, they're going to go sleep on the floor where the trauma surgeon is the real estate owner. And so it might be a good thing to just look over and say, hey, yo, I'm intubate him. You cool with that? And it's not because you have a lack of confidence or you don't, you're not sure what you should or shouldn't be doing, but you're actually sharing in the decision making. You're saying this other person who has stake in what happens to the patient, hey man, like you also get a vote, okay? Some places when you work with residents, like the residents where I work at, the trauma service does own the patients. And so if we say, you yell out into the room, I want to give 2 units of PRBCs and units of FFP or whatever. We use whole blood, but let's just say we say that, and the trauma surgeon behind you says, "Dude, absolutely not. Like, I don't want to give this person any blood. They're totally fine. You shouldn't do that at all." Well, now dude, that huge bomb has just fallen in the room. They've undercut your leadership. They've questioned your medical decision making. They've totally embarrassed you. And so, like, to save yourself from being embarrassed and to make sure that the other people who have a stake in what happens to the patient get a vote, check in with them real quick and say, hey, I'm gonna give them some blood. You cool with that? And about 95% of the time, they'll be like, yeah, yeah, all good. Very rarely you may butt up against some stylistic differences. In that case, if it's a style point, who cares? Other times you may butt up against legitimate medical decision-making differences, and that can be a problem. When you need to phone a friend or when you need to check in with mom, Standing physically close to them is super powerful. The last thing you want to do is I need help and I want to yell across the room that I need help. I don't want that. I don't like that at all. Usually when I'm running a cardiac arrest, I literally well I time myself, right? I don't count on it. I don't rely on anybody else to run the timer for me. But the person who is keeping time, because there always is a recorder usually, I will make them stand next to me. I will sometimes even lock arm in arm with them, and I will confirm that we are on the same time because I don't want them yelling out 30 seconds left when I have 1 minute left. And that's just going to confuse everybody, including me, and I already have enough to deal with. And so standing physically close to that person limits the distance of communication and also limits maybe embarrassing yourself. Okay. Um, you can pre-brief these people. I think we talked about this before, like pre-brief the other powerful people in the room. Like, hey, if you find me and something you're not cool with, just like give me a tap. Cool, give me a tap, and I'm glad to talk about it. But if we yell out, then people don't really know who to follow. So like, if you're cool with me running it, then like just put it through me. Most people will be fine with that. All right, how to fix bad the problem. Okay, baby steps. Check your ego at the door, and then proper mistake mindset. Okay, so things you talked about before, how to be good. That's not everything, but that's a lot of them. These are four things that I find that people mess up the most. So name the problem. Everybody's been in a resuscitation that has been going badly, and then they just are like, is anyone else seeing that this is just absolute dog shit? Is anyone else seeing that we're like committing murder on this patient and it's just not going well? And they get very anxious, okay? Because no one like is saying, hey, it's not going good. Hey, we need to get back on track. So when you are the resuscitation team lead and you start to appreciate that we're getting squirrely, like we're falling off track, that's when you need to say, hey, look, you thought you could get it back on track, but you're not getting it back on track, and internally acknowledge that that's a problem. Okay, you need to accept it internally first. If you don't accept it internally, you can't do it externally. So for you people who are like OODA loop fans, this is the like observe component. Okay, and then after you recognize that it's happening, now you need to say something. You need to externally acknowledge it. Okay, let the room know that it's not going according to plan. Okay, there's some kind of summative statement here, like, okay, team, looks like we're headed in the wrong direction, or hey, y'all, we're getting off track a little bit. We need to get back, and this is how we're going to do it. You need to create an action statement here. So this is your decide and act portion of the OODA loop, which is Jamie's going to switch the pulse ox to the right ear. We're going to secure the IV access on the patient's left, and we're going to start 1 unit of whole blood. That's how we're going to get back on track, everybody. Everybody cool? All right. You get some nods. You get a thumbs up. Somebody flicks you off, whatever. You get started. You acknowledge internally, then you acknowledge externally. You let other people know that you know it's going bad, and then you make an action statement and a summative statement to that effect. Okay. We want to bring the temperature of the room down. The person's dying. They're super sick. No matter how many recesses you've been in, it's always a little intense. Okay. So we want to bring it down. Letting people know that you recognize things are going bad brings the temperature down. We can't bring the temperature down unless we bring some action to it. Okay. This is called the baby steps. Dave Ramsey in there. So baby steps really means iterative decision making. Okay, so sometimes what happens is like the patient's getting like you're doing things, but the patient's getting worse, and maybe you don't know why, or you're coming up on like an impending, fork in the road that you can't take back, like an intubation or like some drug that you can't take back. Like the classic examples like calcium channel blockers. And so like how do you know what to do when the person's not getting better, but you know you need to do something? Well, you use iterative decision making, which is taking small steps forward without fully committing, but preparing yourself to commit. Okay. And so for the intubated example, does the person need to be intubated? Well, I don't know. The airway's kind of dynamic, like not sure, but I know what I can do. Let me put them on nasal cannula with end tidal. Let me put them on a non-rebreather. Let me call the RT. We'll open the intubation stuff. We'll draw up drugs. And then when that's done, if we decide we need to intubate the patient, hey, looks like we're all ready to set up to intubate. And look at that, patient's already pre-oxygenated. We're ready to roll. If we decide the patient doesn't need to be intubated, then fine. Like you've opened some stuff, you spent some money, but like who cares? You're not rushing to intubate them now. If they get worse, you're ready. And things happens like when you have a person with, I use this example all the time, like an AFib with RVR, person with soft pressures. They're not like unstable, but they're definitely sick, and their pressures are, 100 systolic. So what do you do? I mean, should you give them like fluids? Should you give them calcium channel blockers? Should you give them beta blockers? I don't know, but I do know that we need to do something. And so how do we get there? Well, we use small steps to gather more info, get me more reevaluation. So maybe we do bedside ultrasound, look at their cardiac squeeze, look at their IVC. You do a rush exam. Okay, maybe something like that. You take a rectal temperature. You think maybe the person could be septic, but their temperature was like 99.5 on their random number generator temporal scanner. Okay, so maybe get a rectal temperature. You spend an extra 2 minutes and you get like a really good history. Like, what has been happening? Oh, you like stopped your Lasix? Oh, interesting. Oh, actually, you went to Ethiopia and you got malaria? Like, oh, interesting. You get an EKG, you get a chest X-ray, and suddenly you find out, well, they're not just in heart failure from, fluid overload that led them into RVR. They're actually like septic and they actually have pneumonia. Had you given that calcium channel blocker just immediately, probably would have, done some serious harm to hurt them. And so you knew you had to do something. You knew you had to do something relatively quickly, and you made a bunch of small decisions that didn't have crazy consequences, like the point of care ultrasound, like the rectal temperature, like the history, like the EKG, to get to a point where you could say, okay, now I have enough information to make a moderately confident call of what I should or shouldn't be doing. And so you can always take small steps. Small steps isn't necessarily gathering more info, but it is preparing yourself to make a decision. Okay. And then next one, ego is the enemy. The first step in conflict resolution is to like check your ego. You are going to get into conflict with other people on the resuscitation team. I don't care if you're super nice and you never get into conflict with anybody on the street. You are going to come into conflict with people because people have egos, and it's a emotionally charged situation. You don't make friends with you don't make peace with your friends, excuse me, you make peace with your enemies. I wrote that down and I couldn't see it. So you don't make peace with your friends, you make peace with your enemies. You don't need to check your ego with your friends because you're friends. But when you get into conflict with people during resuscitation, you need to fight that urge to just clap back at them immediately and say, well, you know what, I'm doing this because blah, 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 blah. I know exactly what's wrong with this patient and this, that, and the other. You need to get to a point where you can say, hey, it's not about me. It's about the patient. It's about what's best for the patient. We need to do things to prevent that initial knee-jerk reaction. So literally, before you respond to someone who's chirping back at you during a resuscitation or having some kind of conflict, literally take a breath. Don't just immediately say what comes to your mind. Go, yes, what would you like to talk about? Something like that. You really take a breath before you answer. There are some really good non-threatening statements you can make. They're questioning, saying, the person says, well, I think we should be doing this. And you said, well, I don't know. Tell me more about that. You're trying to get to like, you don't know what their problem with your plan is. So find out what their problem with your plan is before you just react. Okay. Because you may react to something that they totally don't even have a problem with. And so try to know what their problem with you is and then go from there. Um, and then sometimes, thank God they're in the room because you would have done something stupid and they're going to have saved you, right? They're going to tell you what's wrong with your plan and you're going to say, well, doggone it, they're right, okay? And the problem is if you harden your stance and you just double down on being an idiot, that's going to lose credibility for you. So everyone in the room like saw the conflict. Like you've all been on a Teams call and heard somebody like be a little disrespectful, and it's like, yo, dude, like Daddy just yelled at Mom in the room. That's weird. And what can happen is if they see you, then double down on your being a moron, they'll lost credibility. Everybody loves it when someone they work with like says, you know what? Yep, I made a mistake. All good. Thank God you're here, and let's move forward. They like people to admit their mistakes because it's human, right? So instead of like being embarrassed that somebody else had that solution, dude, just lean into that solution and say, well, dang, Dr. Jones, I definitely, I hadn't thought about that. I think you're right. I think that probably is the best move for the patient. Now's like a good time for some humor and say, Dr. Jones is here. I was about to do something dumb, but yes, it's a much better idea. Let's certainly put the patient on Levophed and blah, 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 blah. So lean into the solution. Don't harden your stance because of your ego. Okay. All right. We got one more. Um, I love this meme. I've put it like in almost all my lectures, but proper mistake mindset. Forrest Gump's a perfect example on this because he doesn't he doesn't tolerate mistakes, right? He doesn't worry about mistakes. He just moves forward and he learns from them. We need to, as resuscitation team leads, like accept that things are going to go bad sometimes. Accept that you are going to make mistakes before you even make any mistakes. Okay, accept that this is a no-fail mission, the care of our fellow humans that we fail at all the time. Just accept that going into it. You're going to make mistakes because the job, it's not that the job is hard. This job is like actually impossible. It's impossible to save everyone. It's a losing battle, you know? And so just recognize that it is that way. It's not the airline industry and that you're going to have some problems. Recognize that your value as a person is not related to your performance during the resuscitation. And so when things go bad, don't hate yourself. Forgive yourself easily, okay? The dichotomy to that is certainly your responsibility as resuscitation team lead is never make the same mistake twice. Being a leader means the assumption of responsibility, and you are responsible for the lessons that you learned the hard way at the cost of potentially that patient's life. So don't make the same mistakes twice, even if you're able to forgive yourself for the mistakes that you have. Okay? That brings us to the end. Do I do these every resuscitation? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I wish I could say that I did. I wish I had some like super zen ability, but sometimes I have a huge ego. Sometimes I really am like dogmatic in what I want to do. Sometimes I say someone. Sometimes I don't accept responsibility when I should, so I make tons of mistakes. But I do know that when I'm at my best, I definitely do some of these things. When I'm at my absolute best, I can string them together for like a whole recess. Okay. What you need to focus on is like trying your best every time, and then sometimes you'll actually get to your best. Okay, so a lot of times people who they win a gold medal, they do something at a certain level that they've never even done themselves before, but they strung together so many good attempts that occasionally they'll really get their best attempt. And so that's what we're looking for too. Over time, they'll string together longer and longer. Leadership wins until high performance is essentially the norm for you. That's what we're going for, to normalize good performance, to be good on purpose, not be good on accident. Okay. Any questions? Feel free to send them my way. And then here's a brief plug for Stolen Valor Medicine. That's where we're putting up all the YouTube videos, or sorry, these videos for training. They're all going on Stolen Valor Medicine. It's a YouTube channel. As you can see, I have 4 whole subscribers there. So I'm certainly getting really rich. I probably don't need to do much work for the rest of my life. And so feel free to subscribe on there. I won't have to have the links that I have to send out to you guys on email. You can just send, be able to watch them forever and ever. Okay. Stolen Dollar Medicine, there, subscribe and watch the videos, and feel free to hit me up on there, my emails and stuff on there. All right, guys. Thanks.